This dive into the Warhammer 40k army construction rules is made possible by the Magnet Bearing, your one-stop shop for all your magnetization needs. More about them later on in the video. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and we're going to be diving back into the rules of 10th edition 40k and discussing exactly how to create army lists in the new edition. Now, the list building rules for Warhammer 40k have changed dramatically from previous editions, and fortunately for us, they are much simpler. But there is still a lot of nuance within these mechanics that I see a lot of people get confused about. So, what I want to do today, just like in our other videos, is dive into these mechanics, square them all out, and make sure that you are creating your 40k armies as simply as possible. Now, this is something that you can do on the new Warhammer 40k app. There are also a couple online services and apps that you can use to create armies. Now, as always, I'm going to be talking about these rules as they stand currently in Warhammer 40k. We're currently in the Leviathan season, and if they get updated in a near future FAQ, I'll do my best to go down in the comment section and keep you all updated about any potential changes. For reference as well, this all happens at step 1 of the game sequence. This is before you go and create your mission and set up your battlefield. And if you go to an organized play event, the army creation rules will typically create your army before the event begins, and you'll use that army throughout the entirety of the event. And as always, if you enjoy my Warhammer 40k rules content, please let me know down in the comment section down below. Drop a like on the video and subscribe on the channel, all the YouTube stuff, and let's dive into some Warhammer 40k rules. Now, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, army construction Warhammer 40k is simpler than it has always been, and that's awesome, especially for new people jumping into the game. Less so for watch time on this video, but it's good because I don't have to tie myself into a pretzel actually creating an army list for this game. The first step in the army construction phase is to select the battle size you're playing with. This is up to you and your opponent or the group or event that you're playing with. 10th edition has support for 3 different sizes: Incursion, Strike Force, and Onslaught. These are basically the recommended game sizes. However, you can adjust the exact points value you want to be working with within your local group or community. Generally speaking, I think people will stick to these 3 sizes, Incursion being 1,000 points, Strike Force being 2,000 points, and Onslaught being 3,000 points. But some people like to create a happy medium and play somewhere in between, like 1,500 or 2,200 points. I will say, however, that about 90% of games I would estimate get played at the Strike Force level. This is the normal intended scale for the game and the one that the game is balanced for. And basically all competitive events in Warhammer 40k use this points level. Now, the book also lists a step 2 here. This is basically just to grab a piece of paper to write your army on. It's kind of nothing, so we can move on to step 3, and that is to select the faction that you'll be playing with. Rules for each faction in Warhammer 40k are currently included in indexes that are available on Warhammer Community or in the Warhammer 40k app, but in the future they'll also be found in codexes. These include the datasheets for all of the units belonging to that faction and the detachments that are available to them. In addition to being included inside the index, the faction that a unit belongs to is also indicated on its datasheet in the bottom right corner under its faction keyword. This faction selection will not only give you the army rules that you'll be playing with, but also the units you can include, since you can include like units that have that same faction keyword. Now, if you are playing Space Marines, you have an extra step just for you because Space Marines are so cool and special. Space Marine armies can also select a chapter keyword. In the past, additional faction selections like this were called Subfactions, but Space Marines are the only one with any sort of subfaction rules in the game anymore. Everyone else's subfactions all got rolled back into one single monolithic army. You'll notice that on Space Marine datasheets, they have a second faction keyword on many of their units. This is their chapter keyword, and if they have a chapter keyword, you can only include units with the chapter keyword you've selected. So it's like an additional faction on top of your normal faction. Units without a chapter keyword can be taken in any chapter, but you can't, for example, mix Ultramarine and Dark Angels units. So you have to pick either Ultramarines or Dark Angels. Now that we have the faction selected, it is time to pick a detachment. As I said before, almost all armies in the game have a single detachment that you'll find in their index. It includes their detachment rules and any restrictions imposed by them. Now, currently, Space Marine chapters are the only armies in the game that have access to multiple detachments. But this will change as the edition matures, and as more factions get full codex releases, they'll also have access to multiple detachment options. Oftentimes, detachments will limit the kind or number of units units that you can include in your army, especially so for Space Marine chapter detachments that can impose some limits on units that aren't traditionally taken by those chapters. Now, it's important to note that these restrictions are imposed specifically by the detachment you select. So Space Marine chapters, for example, can either take the bespoke detachment that is listed in their index, or they can take the Gladius task force that's listed in the Space Marine index. They get either or option. If they have any restrictions inside the detachment in their index, those don't carry over to Gladius task force. So if you play a normal Gladius task force, you can play any Space Marine units that you want that belong to your chapter or are unchapter aligned. However, you may suffer some additional restrictions if you play in a specific chapter detachment. That says your specific detachments will oftentimes open up synergies with the chapter specific units that you would not get access to if you took those units in Gladius task force. Now, the next step is the fun part. We start adding units to the army. Adhering to the restrictions imposed by whatever detachment you selected, you start adding units to your army based on your points level. You'll notice on the back of each unit's datasheet they have a unit composition. This includes the number of models in the unit and their war gear or any war gear options that they have. You'll then take that unit and the size that you want to take it in and refer to the Munitorum Field Manual. This is a PDF that's also available on Warhammer Community, and the numbers in it are also available on the Warhammer 40k app. This provides you a points value for the unit based on the size of the unit that you're taking. Now, the sizes are a little bit deceiving here because the unit composition sizes are presented in a range of 5 models to 10 models, for example. However, you'll see that most units with a variable number of models available to them, essentially, you'll pay the highest points value for the number of models that you've included. So a unit that can between 5 and 10 models, if they play 5 models, will pay the cost for 5 models, but between 6 and 10 will always pay the cost for 10. So generally speaking, there's no reason not to include the maximum number of models that you can in a unit for the points value you're paying for. You wouldn't really want to take 19 out of 20 models, for example, because you're going to have to pay for that 20th model regardless. However, there are some very specific situations where you might want to take less models. For example, if you have a transport with a transport capacity of 10 and you can take up to 10 models in your unit, but you want to attach a character with them and embark them into the transport, you would end up taking 9, attaching the character for the 10th model, and then you have the availability to put them inside that transport. That said, all of these determinations are made at this step of the process, not during the battle formation step when you determine when your characters are attached and embarked into transports at the beginning of the game, so you have to make all those determinations now. But without having very specific considerations like that, you're basically going to be restricted to taking the maximum number of models that you can. So you pick whatever units you want in your army and their size, tally up their points values until you get up to the points value agreed in the first step. Now, it's important to note that you don't have to go all the way up to that limit, you just can't go over it. It is perfectly legal to be as many points as you want below that limit, you just can't exceed it by any number. And if you have points left over, there is a way to spend those that we'll discuss later on. Now, on top of that, there are some restrictions imposed on the types of units that you can take. Previously, this was done by detachments or by force organization charts. Those are all gone. Basically, you can include whatever combination of units that you want. However, you can never have more than 3 units off of a single datasheet. So, for example, you can never have more than 3 Space Marine Devastator squads or 3 Redemptor dreadnoughts. However, you can have 3 of any other kind of dreadnought. So you could have 3 Redemptors, 3 Ballistas, and 3 Brutalis dreadnoughts if you really wanted to. This opens up a ton of flexibility, and there's a little bit more. Any of your units with the battle line or dedicated transport keyword are basically the normal mooks of your army, and you can include up to 6 of those unit types in your army. So 6 units from each individual datasheet. Meaning if you wanted to, you could take 6 units of intercessors, 6 assault intercessors, and 6 tactical squads all in the same army. Are you gearing up for Warhammer 40k's 10th edition, but unsure of what war gear you want your units to be equipped with? With a new rule set for the game comes a ton of new challenges, and it's hard to be prepared for everything. You've got new opposing armies to play against, new enemy units to contend with, and a quickly changing metagame. Maybe you're worried about erratas impacting your models or the loadouts you've assembled them with. Well, I have an easy solution for you, and that is magnets. And the easiest way to access that easy solution is is the Magnet Baron, your one-stop shop for all of your model modularity needs. Modularity needs. Nailed it. The Magnet Baron is the best place to go to get your armies ready for playing within the new edition. They offer magnetization sets for a wide variety of Warhammer 40k model kits that includes the specific components that you need to magnetize them and allow them to build in any loadout available. So your units can remain flexible without having to break the bank buying additional bits or extra models. Not only that, but the Magnet Baron also includes a wide variety of other useful gaming accessories, including sturdy flight stands that don't snap as soon as you take them out of the box, convenient movement trays for moving large units around, as well as a wide variety of hobby magnets in a frankly ridiculous selection of shapes and sizes. So you can modulate any bit for any model in any part of your collection. So check them out at themagnetbaron.com to get your army ready for the new edition of Warhammer 40k and remain flexible as the game develops. In addition, epic heroes are a little bit more limited. For each epic hero datasheet, you can only include one of that epic hero unit in your army. However, I've seen a lot of confusion around the internet about this rule. The restriction is just like the restriction of 3 units from a single datasheet for other unit types, just based on the datasheet specifically. So, for example, you can have multiple epic heroes in your army. If you're playing Ultramarines, you can have Rabute Gilliman and Marnius Calgar both in the army. They are both epic heroes. However, you can't duplicate either one of them because the epic hero keyword stops you. This is mostly just to represent exceedingly rare units like the Avatar of Cain or characters who can only be in one place at a time. Now, I know this question is going to come up as well, so it's important to note that epic hero doesn't restrict your opponent's army building, just yours. So you and your opponent could both potentially have the same epic hero in your army. Clearly, one of the two is an imposter, and it's up to you and your opponent to have them engage in an epic duel to the death to determine which one is the real one. Next up, I said if you had points left over, there would be a way to spend them, and that is by selecting enhancements. Once you've added all the units you want to your army, if you have additional points, you can spend them on up to 3 enhancements, and these are granted by your detachment. So you'll find specific rules for each of the enhancements and the specific character types that can equip them in your detachment rules. You can have up to 3, and the Munitorum Field Manual will tell you how many points they are. You'll just determine which characters have them, and unfortunately cannot equip them to epic heroes. You can only equip them to regular non-epic characters. The epic heroes already have special abilities baked in, which I think are essentially just basically their own enhancements. Last but certainly not least, in this sequence, you're going to select one model to be your Warlord. You are required to take at least one character into this process so that they can be your Warlord, and the Warlord is important for some in-game effects and mechanics. Generally speaking, you don't really have to worry too much about which your Warlord selection is, but some units have some abilities that unlock when they are the Warlord, and some opponents have abilities that trigger when they kill the Warlord or are attacking the Warlord. Now let's talk about allies and bringing non-faction units in to your Warhammer 40k army. Now, I mentioned before that the general rule is that you can only include units that share the faction keyword that you selected earlier on in the process. However, that's not entirely the case because the ally rules exist, and these are different for a bunch of different factions. So what I'm going to do is actually break down all of the ally rules in the game as far as I know, in case I missed any, and then shame on me, I guess. Now, most of the ally mechanics in Warhammer 40k are based on the keyword that the entire army shares. This is typically the super faction keyword and is separate from the faction keyword that you'll find in the bottom right corner of your unit's datasheets. These are things like Imperium, Eldari, or Chaos, and you'll usually find that ally rules check whichever of these keywords the entirety of your army is composed of. Some ally rules will check your specific army faction. For example, Genestealer cults. If you've selected Genestealer cults as your army faction, you can include Astra Militarum units, even though they aren't themselves Genestealers. However, the inclusion of those Astra Militarum units, because the entirety of your army is not Imperium, assuming you have any Genestealer cult units at all, those then do not unlock other Imperium-specific ally mechanics like Imperial Knights or Agents of the Imperium, which require every model in your army to be an Imperial model. Those Genestealers are preventing the Agents of the Imperium from wanting to assist you. Generally, I'll just refer to these super faction keywords as Imperium or Chaos armies, so I don't have to keep going through and describing exactly how the keywords work, but keep in mind that every time I talk about an Imperium army or a Chaos army, I just mean an army of which all the models in the army have the Imperium or Chaos keyword. Oftentimes as well, the number of allies available to you will be based on a points system, based on the points value of the army that you're playing. 250 points for an incursion game, 500 for a strike force game, or 750 for an onslaught game. Although this isn't a hard and fast rule and is specific to the specific types of allies that you're including, so it's not that you can take a maximum number of 500 points in a strike force game of allies, it's that some allies are restricted to 500 points, and I'll specify specifically which ones in each individual entry. Also as well, basically none of these allies can be the Warlord or be given enhancements. There's exactly one exception, but it does mean that you'll have to have at least one other character in the army besides the allied characters in order to fill your Warlord slot. So with all of that preface out of the way, I'll do my best to talk about all of the ally mechanics in Warhammer 40k, starting with the big one, Agents of the Imperium. This ally system represents Inquisitors, Assassins, and other Imperial auxiliary units that are available to be brought alongside regular Imperium armies. There are enough of them to have their own index, but they can't be taken separately. Their army role actually precludes you from taking them as a separate army, and they don't have any detachment rules. So unfortunately, while as memey and cool as it would be, they can't be played all by themselves. The Imperial Agents Index allows a number of Imperial Agent retinue, which is basically their normal unit, and character units to be taken alongside an Imperium's army based on the points value of the army. Importantly, the points value of the allied units in this case is not actually tallied. You're just restricted to one of each retinue and character in an incursion game, 2 of each in a strike force game, and 3 of each in an onslaught game, regardless of the points cost of those Imperial Agent units. Assassins cannot be your Warlord, although technically there are no restrictions to Inquisitors being your Warlord or being given enhancements. However, basically all enhancements in the game have specific keywords that none of the Imperial Agents actually qualify for. But it does mean that if you don't want to take any characters out of your regular faction, you can include characters from the Imperial Agents and make one of them your Warlord. Next up, we have Knights, and these are available both for Imperium and Chaos armies, with Imperial Knights being available for Imperium and Chaos Knights being available for Chaos, as would make sense. These are eligible to be taken in their respective super factions, again regardless of points value, and this is actually also regardless of the value of the game that you're playing. So you can spend as many points on your Knight selection as possible, as long as you adhere to the limit of having only a single Titanic unit or up to 3 Armiger or War Dog units, depending on whether you can take Imperial or Chaos Knights. Similarly, Adeptus Titanicus has functionally the same rule. An Imperium army can include one single Adeptus Titanicus unit if they wish, regardless of the points value of the unit or the army. Obviously, you still have to have the number of points available to include that unit in your army. They still add to your points total, so you can't take a Warlord Titan in an incursion game, for example, but it is potentially possible to take a Warhound Titan in a Strike Force or larger game. Similarly, if you are playing Chaos, you can use the exact rule. The Knight that you include in your army has its Adeptus Titanicus keyword replaced with Titanicus Traitoris. Otherwise, it works exactly the same. It also becomes a Chaos model, so it doesn't break any of your other Chaos super faction abilities. And speaking of Chaos super faction abilities, Chaos armies, in addition to taking Chaos Knights and Titanic units, can also include Chaos Demons. Depending on the points value, so 250 for Incursion, 500 for Strike Force, and 750 for Onslaught, you can include Demons in a Chaos army. This is further restricted if you are playing a Chaos Space Marine Legion allied to a specific god. World Eaters, for example, can only take Khorne units, Thousand Suns can only take Tzeentch, Death Guard can only take Nurgle, and Emperor's Children, despite the fact they don't have an actual sub-faction ability or representation, this is represented by Lucius the Eternal being your Warlord, can only take Slaanesh units. Drukhari armies can include Harlequins or Unwrathy units, depending on the points value, so 250 for Incursion, 500 for Strike Force, or 750 for Onslaught. Similarly, Ynnari armies can take Drukhari, and again, just like the Emperor's Children, these don't have their own specific sub-faction rules, but they are represented by Yvraine being the Eldari army's warlord. They're able to take up to 500 points of Drukhari in an incursion game, 1,000 points in a Strike Force game, or 1,500 in an Onslaught game, so a little bit looser restrictions than the other point-specific restrictions that we've seen previously. Genestealer cults can take Astra Militarum units as their brood brothers, so 250 250 for incursion, 500 for strike force, with some additional restrictions against epic heroes, Ogren, Ratlings, Tempestus Scions, Commissars, Preachers, Regimental Engineers, Servitors, and Aircraft. And with that, those are all of the ally mechanics in Warhammer 40k. The rules for all of these ally abilities are found specifically in the indexes, either of the allies or the alliers. So you can check them out there and take a look for yourself just to make sure that your list composition is accurate. And other than that, that is all of the list construction rules in Warhammer 40k, 100% of them. That's it. Pretty straightforward and makes army compositions in 10th edition much, much more flexible than we've ever seen in 40k in the past, which is honestly super cool for list diversity. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up. Big thanks to Magnet Baron for sponsoring this video and making this rules deep dive possible. Thanks as well to everybody who supports the channel either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are great and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming. God damn it. That was a really good take, and it was ruined by my phone. My email, no! Why did I turn it off? You fool!